make a bold claim here and say that this is the spookiest tree in the Midwest. We've got creepy looking bark, bats, wild turkeys eating the nuts. This is really where it's at. I love this tree. I can't even decide what my favorite thing is. Let's talk about the bark. You gotta be a square not to love this bark. It sounds like just a plant nerd thing, but I'm not kidding. This bark is amazing. Are you seeing this? You don't have to be a tree person to recognize how cool this bark is. It's different from any other tree that grows here. The bark peels off in big pieces as it grows. I'm Gen X, so I'm just gonna come out and say it. This is the most metal looking bark I've ever seen in my life. This tree is so f***ing metal. Is this like old now? Whatever, I don't care. I made a metal scale so that you can see where this tree falls, how metal it is. Who wouldn't want a tree with spooky bark that turns gold around Halloween? This really makes the season magical. An autumn lover's tree. Get your pumpkin flavored coffee drink, find your nearest Shagbark Hickory tree, have a complete fall experience. Everyone wants their tree to look beautiful in the fall. There's nothing like a street full of colorful trees in October, but not all of our native trees have that punch of color that really makes them stand out. Maple trees are the most common trees in my neighborhood, so I'm gonna want something that's going to stand out instead of blending in with the background. That's the fun of trees changing color, right? The contrast of all the reds, yellows, and oranges against the backdrop of green invasive species. Well, Shagbark Hickory has the most yellow color I have ever seen. It's like a yield sign, yellow school bus. I'm gonna say it's more of a gold color. The gold is striking against the rest of the trees. It contrasts really nicely next to the red maple trees in my neighborhood. I'm not an arborist, but I am a person with a yard. I live in the suburbs, so we have power lines everywhere, so finding the right place to plant a tree can be a little confusing. A lot of our native trees, when grown out in the open with no competition, can get pretty wide. A lot of oak trees are as wide as they are tall. This is awesome. I mean, look at how big that crown is. While not a skinny tree by any means, the Shagbark Hickory is more upright and bell-shaped instead of spread out and reaching. The wood is really strong, so it's not one of those trees that drops branches everywhere or starts to fall apart after a certain age. Looking at you, silver maple, it makes really strong branches. It's so strong that hickory wood is often used to make tools like hammer handles. It means it's a strong tree. The hickories at the edge of this forest preserve are showing off how tall they are because they're growing up, not out. I think people are more worried about how wide a tree gets rather than how tall it gets. And this is a tree with a more narrow form that won't shade out the entire front yard. It's become much more popular to think of your landscaping as something that's functional, something that helps the ecosystem, feeds the bees, or maybe gives food for your family. A lot of people want to know which landscaping plants are edible, and sometimes I can be a little skeptical. When I see someone leave a comment that dandelions are delicious,
you sure about that?
Everybody has different tastes. Same thing with acorns. Acorns are edible, and with a ton of work, you can technically eat them. Fantastic. I can say this with my whole chest. Hickory nuts are delicious. These hickory nuts are delicious, and it hurts me to put them in the ground. I did put some aside for myself.
To do it this way. Here. I mean, that looks pretty good in there.
Acorns, black walnut take a little bit of processing. Walnuts are difficult to open. Hickory nuts are a lot easier to smash open. You don't have to run over them with your car. So I did want to get a chance to try these hickory nuts. The nuts that you get at the store, they've been sitting out for a little while and sometimes they don't taste as good. To get some fresh nuts is pretty amazing. They have a maple flavor. They're very soft, moist. They're not dried out. Almost reminds me of coconut a little bit right when I bite into it. A couple of seconds later, you get this hit of like maple and just this nutty flavor that is very rich. It's not overpowering, really good. I mean, I could eat these all day. It's such a wonderful treat to be able to get something. You can't buy hickory nuts at the store. These would be awesome roasted. They're already so flavorful, so they don't really need to be toasted, but they would be awesome toasted. Kind of like walnut, but a little bit more mapley, and I'm so glad I was able to do this. This is the first year I've ever collected hickory nuts and eaten them. I have to restrain myself from eating the rest of them. I do want to plant them. Oh, so good. A hickory tree can drop hundreds of nuts, providing food for your family for generations. They're a little bit difficult to get out of the shell without breaking them into a million pieces. In my opinion, it's totally worth it for a small batch. And we're not the only ones that love them. Mammals like foxes, squirrels, raccoons, wild turkeys, blue jays, woodpeckers, and black bears. There's another spooky reason you might love this tree, and that's that it has a lot of wildlife value for a particular animal. Specifically, bats. Bats! The bark is so peely that it forms these protective little pockets that are a safe place for insects and small mammals like bats. To control mosquitoes, a lot of people have thought, well, maybe I'll put up a bat house, which is fantastic. It's a little complicated to do it right. They need to live up high, so it's a little challenging to get the bat house up there, which might be a challenge for some of us. Planting a shagbark hickory or 2 or 3 or 5 can give the bats the shelter they need. So I'm gonna rate this tree on 2 different scales. One is the metal scale that we already talked about. It competes in the highest category on the metal scale, which is going to be the black metal category. It's gonna be in that category with its brother, the bur oak, which is also creepy and very metal. We'll talk about the bur oak in another video. And we'll rate it on the LLP scale. Lisa likes plants. I'm gonna give this an 8.5. Now, as much as I love this tree, there are 2 reasons why I'm giving it an 8.5 for landscaping. One of them is that it's a slower growing tree, and we live in kind of an instant gratification culture. We may not have the patience to wait for a tree like the shagbark hickory to mature. If you want a shade tree within 5 or 6 years, the shagbark hickory does take its time growing. It makes that really dense wood that we talked about. So I took off a little bit of a point for that. I'm also taking off just a little bit because if you love your lawn, I don't think it's a great idea to plant fruit and nut trees because you're gonna have fruits and nuts all over the lawn. So if you love your lawn, don't plant a nut tree. Just don't plant it. Got something else. For the rest of us, we love trees more than lawn. Go ahead and get a shagbark hickory. We have other choices than the 3 trees that are mass produced. We can think outside the big box garden center and find really interesting trees that give your neighborhood character and diversity. Your neighbors probably don't have this tree, but every fall someone will ask, wow, what kind of tree is that? Your community is going to be so proud. Also, don't plant fruit or nut trees near the sidewalk or in the driveway because you're going to have fruit and nuts on the driveway and on your vehicle. Just don't do it. That's not the right place for it. I still rate this tree very high at an 8.5 out of 10 for landscaping because of its amazing fall color, super cool peely bark, wildlife value, edible nuts, and it grows straight up instead of growing so wide. This is an awesome tree. I think this tree is underplanted. I really don't see it in new developments. I do see it in older homes that have more mature landscaping. So it means that maybe in the past people did plant the tree and they sort of stopped planting it, probably because people didn't like the nuts and they preferred their lawn. We don't care about that. We're excited about getting nuts. We're excited about wildlife value, beautiful fall color. I mean, what more can you ask for in a tree? If you want to get the word out about these beautiful native trees, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. Please consider supporting me on Patreon. A little bit really goes a long way so I can spend more time making these videos.